talk real quick about the Disney live action studio. And I'm not here to talk about their politics, their rumors, their overall quality, or anything like that. I just want to talk about them for a second in terms of their image and the content that they have produced. Now, what we have with the Disney studios, especially when we're looking at the live action films, which is something that's very overlooked. When people talk about Disney, they're normally talking about the animated studio, but they've had a rich history of live action films. And they're unique in that no other studio in Hollywood history, especially not one that's been around as long as they have, can be said to have kind of the same overarching philosophy that Disney has had. You know, Universal, Fox, MGM, you know, all these other studios, they produce basically all kinds of films. And yeah, maybe you can tell a Fox film or whatnot, but they're all over the place. Disney has focused in on one niche, and they've been serving that pretty much consistently for their entire history. That is the family-oriented film. And as such, if you kind of line their live-action movies up chronologically, you can actually get a pretty interesting view of the changing times and the aesthetics, the types of films that were popular in each of the decades. It's kind of like looking at the James Bond series, almost. And I bring this up because I find, you know, I'm familiar with the early films, you know, the That Darn Cat, the Haley Mills filmography, the Annette Funicello filmography, Dean Jones, and all those, you know, all those great performers. But I came of age in the 90s and the late 80s. And looking at the Disney films of that time, something very, very interesting happens. In the early 90s, Disney films, live-action movies were, I don't want to say darker. They weren't dark. I think that's a word that's thrown around a little bit too much, and it loses a little bit of its meaning. But the Disney films were not as squeaky clean as they would eventually become. You're looking at films like The Rocketeer, White Fang, The Three Musketeers, things of that nature. Very few of these starred kids. And when they did, you know, something like Newsies, I mean, the kids smoked. The kids were not these squeaky clean, Even Stevens, Hannah Montana, Lizzie McGuire kids. They were rough and tumble street kids. But then, towards the mid-90s, there is a very clear shift. And suddenly, it's starting to veer more towards a little goofier aesthetic. Now, I want to be clear, that's not a bad thing. It's just something you notice as the 90s are kind of starting to establish themselves. Trends and fashions and whatnot are starting to become more clear and more distinct from the 80s. That the visual language and the types of movies and the way those movies are portrayed start to swing in a different direction. You want to see something interesting? Go look at the original Mighty Ducks from 92 compared to Mighty Ducks 2 in 94. Okay, both good movies. I'm not here to diss them. But if you look at the original Mighty Ducks, Emilio Estevez is, you know, he's caught drinking and driving. The kids are a little bit more what I would consider realistic. They seem a little bit more in that Goonies Monster Squad kind of vein. Of course, in the Disney, you know, through the Disney filter. The color palette is a lot more muted. You know, the film's a little grainy, I notice. And that's not just video quality, just the way it was shot. It's a little bit more grounded. compare it to Mighty Ducks 2 a few years later, 94, and suddenly the color palette is much brighter. The kid characters are a lot more broadly drawn. They're bigger, in personality and whatnot. Things are, the supporting characters go from being more realistic people to being, again, more cartoony. The guy who, gets Emilio Estevez to coach Team USA, very, look at them, we're the Bash Brothers, that kind of thing. Now, some could say that is a result of it being a sequel, but I don't think that's the facts. I think it's because they are taking place, believe it or not, in two very separate time periods. Okay? And again, neither one is bad. I'm not criticizing, I'm just drawing the parallel. The reason I'm taking so much time to draw this out is it seems like right smack dab in the middle of this. Right smack dab in the middle of this tonal shift, there is one movie that seems to be the merging of both of those aesthetics. That more realistic grounding and the more cartoony, bigger performances that would become the staple for the rest of the decade and lead into the more, bubblegum, tween kind of sensibilities of the 2000s, and that is 1993's Cool Runnings. Because that's what really struck me about this film. I've watched this film many times. That's what really struck me about it the last time I watched it to do this review, is just how much it seems to be perfectly wedged right between the shifting of these time periods. Because on the one hand, its story and some of its characters are really grounded in reality. And on the other hand, it takes a much broader, cartoonier view of some characters. And yet, the tone does not feel at all at odds with each other. It seems like it's a perfect balance. Okay, before we get into that, couple little asterisks to put before we get into too much of this review. First of all, yes, this movie is based on a true story of the first Jamaican bobsled team. That being said, I have absolutely no knowledge of the actual history. I saw a video on them once. So I can almost guarantee you what really happened is not what happened here. So I'm going to view this movie, and I'm going to review this movie as if it is just a movie, ignoring the historical elements. So, if you come at me with, well, that had to happen because that's what really happened. Okay, I don't care. All right? I really don't. So, sometimes I do. Ghost of Mississippi, I do. Cool Runnings, not so much. Okay? So I wanted to put that out there first. Also, once again, I'm bending the rules a bit because this one is not really a forgotten gem. People still know this one. But what they tend to know about it and why I still think it qualifies is that, it's the one with the Jamaican bobsled team. And that's about it. I think the movie itself has kind of gotten lost to time a little bit, and we need to bring it back. That's what Forgotten Gems is really all about. So, for those who don't know, the story is as follows. In the late 80s, a group of Jamaican sprinters who didn't qualify for the Olympics through wacky circumstances, but still want to go to the Olympics, decide they're going to form a Jamaican bobsled team using a disgraced American coach played by John Candy as their coach, and he's going to teach them. And of course, they're going to go to the Olympics, and everybody thinks they're a joke because it's Jamaica and they got a bobsled team. But they're going to go and they're going to work for respect, and they're going to gain respect. And it's a sports movie. You can pretty much get what happens in a sports ball flick. So right away we see the influence of the late 90s creeping in there, and that this is a very, very pat kind of sports movie setup. Big points to them for using a sport and a story that had not been touched upon. I mean, how many bobsledding movies are there out there? You know? You can also see the influence from the earlier 90s with things like the John Candy character, who is a disgraced athlete, someone who has fallen from grace and has to now try to redeem themselves. And I think the best example of kind of this thesis statement that I've set up is the different characters themselves. John Candy's character is given the more realistic grounding. You know, his journey and his, path back to redemption through these 4 kids is the more realistic. His interaction with the other people is a lot more, I keep using the word realistic, but it feels more natural. Okay. Meanwhile, our 4 leads, our 4 main characters, are drawn with a much broader brush. They're much broader characters, in that they're almost caricatures. They're very clear archetypes, and it struck me for the first time. I never realized this. Our 4 main characters, they're the fucking Ninja Turtles. They have the Ninja Turtle personality dynamic. You have Doris, who is the leader, so he's Leonardo. You've got Junior, who's kind of the quiet nerd, so he's Donatello. You've got Yul Brynner, who is the badass, so he's Raphael. And you have Senka, who is the comic relief, so he's Michelangelo. So they have the Ninja Turtle personality traits. Now here's the thing I want to make clear, because I think this gets lost a lot. Archetypes, stock characters, are not a bad thing in and of themselves. The reason we still use archetypes, and the reason why every genre and every generation has new archetypes, is because they're easily identifiable. That's supposed to be the point. That's why archetypes were invented in the first place in Commedia dell'arte. They didn't invent it, but they perfected it, basically. You know, it's so everybody everywhere can immediately go and go, I know who that character is and what their role is in the film. It's a shorthand. When stock characters and archetypes don't work is when you don't do anything fun with them, or they're not fun characters. And in this case, they are really fun characters. You know, they're well drawn. They each have kind of their own conflict or their own mini story arc that they're trying to get through. Doris wants to go to the Olympics and wants to be the best he can be. Yul just wants off the island. He wants to make something more of himself. Junior wants to break away from his father and be his own man. And Senka, okay, he doesn't have a character arc. Senka is just there for the comic relief. But he does it really well. Dougie Doug as Senka is an outstanding comic character, and he just is so good and so fun. This is, again, when Disney kind of veers into this mid to late 90s style, a lot of the jokes become very groan-worthy and become very kind of embarrassing in hindsight, I find. Because I felt like as they moved on, they started talking down to their audience instead of talking to them. Other conversation. Here, I feel like he's still kind of the clown. But he's not with a lot of clown characters, you have a hard time understanding, okay, why do they have this fucking guy? And he makes his reason for being there. He's not a prime athlete. He's not like the rest of them. He's not a sprinter. He simply is a clown. But his reason for being there is he is the soul of the team. He is the one that when Doris goes a little too far and tries to, copy someone else's style, he's the one who says, no, we're Jamaican. We can't pretend to be somebody else. We have to be us. So he has the Ron Weasley role, that role of, that guy who doesn't seem like he serves any real purpose, but his presence is a counterpoint to the other characters to keep them on track. I really like the chemistry, not with the 4 main characters. They all play their arcs really well. They play their archetype really well. They have a good natural chemistry together, so you can see the relationships building as they go. And they have a great chemistry with John Candy. Now, I don't need to sit here and tell you that John Candy was brilliant. I don't need to do that. I'm going to, but I don't need to. John Candy was brilliant. Now, it was funny. I was having a conversation with a really, really good friend of mine. And we were talking about The Princess Bride. And I was saying that, you know, I love The Princess Bride, but when I watch it, I always feel a little twinge of sadness seeing Peter Falk and Andre the Giant. And I feel the same way about John Candy movies. And I honestly don't think sadness is the right word. But you get this little pang. You're happy for the legacy that they have left. And it's not necessarily a sadness that they're gone. I guess the best way to say it is that there are certain roles that actors play that you feel like you're not seeing the character, you're seeing the person. Like they are playing a genuine part of themselves, only, spread out. And, it's like they say in wrestling with the character turned up to 11. Look at Fezzik, in Princess Bride. That feels like, and from all accounts it really was, as close to the real Andre the Giant as anybody ever really got. The character he played, in wrestling was not really him. It was a part of him, but it wasn't him. And you get the feeling like this is who Andre the Giant really was this gentle, good-hearted, giant. And I really, with John Candy movies, I feel the same way. A lot of his films, Delirious, Only the Lonely, this one, The Great Outdoors. So much of his films, I feel like the characters he plays are so close to himself, and he is putting, his heart and his good nature and his, just his essence into the movie. And when you see that, it really makes you feel like you're more connected to this person you've never met, and therefore the loss, the knowledge that they're gone, feels a little heavier. I think the same thing can be said of like Robin Williams, for me in Good Will Hunting. You feel like that was the real Robin Williams, and he was letting a lot of vulnerability show in that role, and so you feel like you really know him a little bit. I'm off track here, but the point is that, man, John Candy was so good. Such a funny guy and such a brilliant comedian, but such a good actor too. He didn't get the acting chops or the acting credit that he really deserved. He was good, and he had to be kind of the grounding for this whole thing, not just in his character, but him. He was the big star with 4 virtual unknowns at the time. And so his story arc was really the more emotional of all of them and the more complete. So he had a lot he had to carry in this. I think also it's got to be said that as a sports movie, it's smart enough that it leans into the cliches of the sports movie, but also circumvents them. That's not the right word, but it's the first one I could come up with. Key thing being, and I know this is part of the real history, but the key thing being, they lose. They lose in the end. Technically, they lose the race. They lose. They come in last. But what this film is very smart to do, and what it sets up, is that much like Rocky, and this film was called Rocky on Ice. That was, one of the critical taglines they used. Is that winning, the traditional definition of winning the match or winning the game, was not the point. The point was to be respected as athletes. Okay? And I find that final scene of the 4 of them after they crash the sled, the 4 of them carrying that sled kind of defiantly across the finish line, I find that incredibly uplifting. I kind of wish more movies did that. Imagine for a second what would have happened in The Mighty Ducks, the first one, if they lost the game. But they still celebrated at the end like they'd won. You know, because they made it to the state championships. They did what nobody said they could. They proved everybody wrong. You know, I think that's a message we could maybe put out there. I'm not saying like every sports movie the character has to lose, but I'm saying that winning is, the definition of winning in a given circumstance is not always just who comes out with the trophy at the end. You know? And I like that this movie went there and did that. Is this movie perfect? No. But its perfection, its imperfections are part of its charm. Like, whatever I can pick at in terms of its perceived imperfections are more just a change in the way films are made, and a way they're more of a preference than a real flaw in the film. You know, again, the fact that the four main characters are so broadly drawn and whatnot, and sometimes there seems to be, despite what I said earlier, there is a slight tonal difference, and sometimes the tones don't mesh as well as they should. But again, that's all things. There is one thing I really hate. One thing I really hate about this movie, and it's not unique to this film. There are certain lines and certain phrases I hate hearing in movies, because one, they're pat, and the phrasing never changes. They're always phrased pretty much exactly the same, and they feel like they're there because they don't trust the audience to understand what is going on. So let me give you the example. In this film, when they're getting ready to go on their first run in the bobsled, they're all on the bobsled, and everyone's laughing. You know, Junior says, "Hey, does it seem like nobody likes us?" And Yul Brynner says, "We're different. People are always afraid of what's different." I hate that fucking line. I'm not saying it's untrue, but I hate that line in movies because it is such a fortune cookie, poorly written phrase that they drop into movies like this one to go, see, you get it, you get it, you get it. You could take that line and that exchange out, and I don't think anybody in the audience, no matter how young they are, would misinterpret what was going on and what the story was about or what was happening in the film at that exact moment. Everybody fucking gets it. But having to drop that pat line in there just feels like, again, this is where Disney is starting to go in the direction that I had a little bit of a hard time with, feeling like they're talking down to me instead of talking to me. You know, and they're not unique in this. You know, another line I hate, now it just went right out of my head. People are always afraid of what they don't understand. You know, think about this comparison. Greatest Showman, the song "This Is Me." They never once say people fear what they don't understand. They let the emotion of the song and the situation carry through and trust that the audience is smart enough to know what's happening. Likewise, another line I hate, I don't care what people say, or I don't care what people think. That line is thrown into movies look, I'll be honest, folks, I love Let It Go. Not gonna lie, I love Let It Go. But I hate it when she says, I don't care what they're going to say. Because the minute you say that line, you negate your own message. If you have to go out of your way to say, I don't care what people think, or I don't care what people say, clearly you fucking do. Now, why this drives me crazy in this movie? Again, one, it is a very pat line, but This movie also has one of my all-time favorite movie lines. One of the best lines ever in a movie, I think. And I'm not joking about that. I've said that before, and I've been kind of very snarky about it, but I'm being 100% honest. It has one of the best lines in a film, and one that I've used in life, and I've given the advice to other people. There's this great moment right before the last race, and Doris, played by Leon, asks John Candy, why did you cheat? Why'd you cheat all those years ago? And he says, well, I had to win. I've made winning my whole life. I had to win. And he says, well, I don't understand. You had 2 gold medals. You had everything. Why'd you have to cheat? And John Candy says, a gold medal is a wonderful thing. But if you're not enough without it, you'll never be enough with it. Damn, that's a good line. Damn, that line to me is fucking transcendent. It is the sum up of the movie and its themes, perfectly, without having to get on a soapbox, without having to, really make sure you're hammering it into the people. You see what we're saying? You see what we're saying? Perfectly written, perfectly delivered. And one of those lines I heard, and it was like, it's like going into light speed for the first time, or it's just a really important line. It's so simple, but I think it says it all. You gotta be good with you, and if you're not okay on your own, or you're not enough without a championship, then the championship you're gonna win is not gonna feel like enough. You're never gonna, that piece, that trophy, that belt, that ring, whatever, is not going to make you whole. Only you can do that. And I really love that. And I love that message, and I love the way it was delivered in this film. I think this movie stands up. It's a fascinating little time capsule for that particular moment in Disney filmmaking. And it's still a lot of fun. It's still really funny, and it's still surprisingly moving. So if you haven't checked out Cool Runnings in a little while, do yourself the favor, especially these days when we could all use a little bit of an uplift, a reminder of the triumph of the human spirit. Go give it a look. And so that's that. All right, we march on. Feels like things are starting to put themselves back together. We don't know yet, but we're hopeful. But drive home reviews will always be there, and so will I. So thanks for watching, and until next time, drive safe, and I will see you at the movies.